Okay, I got all the fancy gadgets, so I'm feeling like a TED Talk. I also have a pointer. Okay, so this talk is called "The Medium is the Message," oh, sorry, I can use this. Oh, how I learned to let go and make small, imperfect games. So we'll start. My name is YIFAT. Currently, I live in Toronto. I teach in university. I also make games. Generally, most of my games are fairly autobiographical. I had one game called Real Army Simulator, which was about how the army is boring. Because everybody, when I moved to Canada, everybody thought I could kill them. And I was like, no, I was in IT and I feel very uncomfortable about this. So I made a game about it. My next game is, we're just starting soon, but it's about gentrification in Toronto. I make fairly, like, I don't want to say mainstreamy, but they're not, I'm not someone who's comfortable making, like, I won't say bad, but more like imperfect experimental stuff. But the last year has been fairly hard to me, and I'll talk about it a little bit. And so somehow I find myself doing a series of games. There's spelling mistakes in some of them, I'm sorry. Called The Medium is the Message, and they're all small games made in non-game engines. So the rule of those games are basically, I cannot use an actual game engine. And I'll talk about it. And it also was a way for me to start making, just to let go and make something that might not be perfect and might not be beautiful, but it works and is playable and might even be fun. Dubious, but thing. Side content warning, I'm going to talk a little bit about anxiety and depression and taking medication. Nothing too serious, but if you feel uncomfortable, I should be done in about 20 minutes. So, I am the worst person to talk about this subject. I never really considered myself an artist. I'm very much a designer. I studied animation and like 3D animation, and I always, if you do 3D, it's like if something is not perfect, it drives you insane, or Maya crashes. Oh, there's some 3D people here. And so, I've never was an artist. I was always like a designer, and I always thought myself something fairly commercial and more industry focused. And I'm generally not necessarily the most communicative of designers. I always have fairly high production value, even though sometimes it masks a game being kind of bad, but that's a thing. And I think I'm not necessarily a fairly prolific creator. I make a lot of stuff. I don't release a lot of stuff. And I'm a little bit slow. So making so many games or making a lot of games in 1 year is just not a thing that's going to happen. There's people who've made, one person who've made 100 games in 5 years. I'm not that person. And I'm a little bit too anxious and a little bit too pedantic to really let go and just make a thing that is imperfect. And over the years, I had to really fight my need to everything have to be perfect, because if you want everything to be perfect, you never get anything done. And while I often write and talk about imperfect game, and I talk about humor and glitch, my personal work tends to be a little bit different than stuff I talk about academically. And most importantly, I'm not actually part of Zine culture. I've never been part of it. I grew up in Jerusalem. There wasn't any Zine culture as far as I know, at least not growing up. I moved to Toronto, and Toronto has a really big Zine community and culture, and it was an interesting thing to experience, but I never really was part of it. So how did it all start? 2018 was a terrible year. And to be fair, 2018 was a terrible year to pretty much everyone. But personally, kind of a bad year. I started it with kind of 2017, I kind of burned out because I was teaching game design in every university in Ontario, pretty much. I am still considered the mother of game dev in Toronto. And I started burning out. I moved. I was like, okay, I'll just work in one place. And just everything kind of went wrong this year. And to be fair, again, my work is since 2008. A lot of bright spots, and if I look at it from afar, this probably was a fairly good year. I got my permanent residency, I have my own house. But somehow, stuff kind of felt bad all the time. A lot of it was precarious employment, aging. I've passed the 35 now, and it's like, ooh, yeah. I'm not married, I don't have kids. And I'm feeling like I just don't have a place in the game industry. I also, so to deal with this anxiety, and I'm someone who gets panic attacks fairly regularly, and I had a fairly severe episode in 2008. But somehow I find myself to deal with it instead of necessarily getting more depressed, I started just making this weird bunch of games. And I've called them Zine games, and I'll talk about it. So the first game I made was the Worksheet Saga. So it all started in late November 2017 when I didn't get a job as a game designer in a big company. I'm not going to say which one, but it's AAA, and I live in Toronto, so I'll let you guess. They're very nice, but I didn't get it. And that was sort of, the work was a lot of spreadsheets. But that was sort of, for me, I mean, it's, and I have to warn, a lot of the problems were, they seem kind of minute, first world problems. But it sort of touched with a lot of my personal insecurities. So I got really kind of down for a bit. And in the past, I would have been just down for a while and not do anything. But this, the older I get, the more spiteful I am. So I was like, I will prove how good I am making spreadsheets, and that I'm a good game designer. I will make a game in Excel. And I did. And also, to be fair, like, I'm not the first person who made a game in Excel, but, So this is how the Worksheet Saga came to be. And it starts, there's a class exercise I give students when I teach about emergent gameplay. And the students are basically asked to take the concept around John Conway's Game of Life and try to make a game. So basically, the idea is have something that has very, very simple rule, very simple agent, and create something complicated from it. It's a really nice exercise that I stole very shamefully from someone else. So the Game of Life, this is from Wikipedia. It's a cellular automation device by British mathematician John Horton Conway, 1970. And the whole point of it, it's on a grid, and you have one color, one is white, one is black, Black means life, white means no life, or populated or unpopulated. And there's just 4 simple rules. So any live cell, black cell with fewer than 2 live neighbors die, so it becomes white. Any living cell with 2 or 3 living neighbors lives to the next generation, so it continues to be black. Any live cell with more than 3 live neighbors dies, and any dead cell with exact 3 live neighbors become a live cell. Obviously, it's very simple. You can Google it, and you can actually play. It's just a simulation. You make a thing, you run the simulation, and it creates these really beautiful patterns that really try to emulate how biology works. He, by the way, I read an interview with him. He hates the game of life. So I decided, okay, I'll take this idea, and Excel is perfect for it, but I'll make it into a game, because right now it's a simulation. So I started with, there's actually a YouTube tutorial someone made to make the game of life in Excel. And so I made that, I followed the tutorial, and basically the way the tutorials work is that you have 2 cells. Wait, I'll use this. Aha. You have 2 cells. One of them affects the other. So one of them is where you draw the stuff, and one of them is the result. And you just run it, and you get this beautiful simulation. But the problem is, as I said, game of life is not a game. It's a simulation. You don't do anything. There's no end rules. There's no end state. There's just this simulation that runs. So I needed to change some of the rules in order to make it more of a game. This is like stages of how it looked over, as you can see, beautiful artistry of Excel. In order to make it more of a game, while still maintaining the spirit of the original simulation. So I changed the rules by adding color and an end state. The end state is basically if everything is the same color, you win. It's really hard to make it, but I kept the Excel open, so it's actually, you can cheat fairly easily. So the rules was that any white cell with 3 blue neighbors will turn blue. Any cell with fewer than 2 blue cells around it will turn white. And any cell with 3 blue cells around it will turn pink. And any cells with 3 pink cells will turn blue. So, and you win the game by if the board label reaction is in one color, which is blue. Very, very simple. I had a lot of crying to a friend who does a lot of spreadsheets about writing formulas in spreadsheet. Some of it is formula, some of it is Visual Basics. It's available on each if you want to play. And so I put it online. I released it on Christmas Day, because why not? And I actually got some press. Boing Boing was like, got it. So I earned $50 on this game, which is the most I ever earned on a game. But yeah, it's available on each. You can download it if you want. So I never planned to continue working on this game. It was like this fun thing. And I was like, OK, that's cool. Let's go back to making fairly serious game. But everything kept like being shitty. Continue. So somehow I started continuing making games. And I was like, oh, well, I can't just let it go. Let's just make it into a series. And we call it The Medium is the Message, which some of you might have digital media education, know what I mean. And I'll call it Zine game. And again, like, my definition was it's games that I'm creating for the sake of creating. Some people have better definition than me, and I have more experience, but this is the way I approach them. So games that are just made to the sake of creating them. And also they have to be finished. The medium of the message, I call it the medium of the message just because I I vaguely remember the first class in media in grad school, and I was like, oh, was this guy, Marshall McLuhan, who I kept confusing with Norman McLaren, who was a very famous animator, all the Scottish who lived in Toronto. But his idea, and again, I'm probably going to say it very badly just because I actually I just remembered it from class, and I was like, okay, that sounds like a good idea. But basically, the medium we use will create the message we want to infer. So we have to be conscious of how we transfer our medium and how we how we present our message in the medium. If you want a better idea around it, if you watch Lindsay Ellis' YouTube, she actually just talked about it. And if not, highly recommended. So he's a very famous media study person. And I was like, okay, I remember this guy. Okay, I'll call it in this series. Sounds fitting. So the idea of the games was not just to make games that are not done using traditional means, but also make games that use those programs in a way that emphasizes what they are. So it's not just making a game in Excel, it's making a game that says something about using Excel. Making a narrative game in Excel is not the same as making a grid-based simulation game in Excel. In the case of Excel, it was about using the idea of the grid, which is such a big part of the program. And the complexity of something that is on the surface is very simple. So Excel looks simple, but there's a lot of complexity hidden in the program. And it was also sort of became a tool and a nod to the tools we use as designers. Because as designers, and you all know, we use Excel, we use Word, we use PowerPoint, we don't, and again, as someone who teaches, the first thing every student ever tells me is oh, I've been playing games all my life, so I just want to make them. And then I said, okay, this is Excel. Look how sexy our work is. And sit around for a few hours, move some pixels around. You'll get a game at the end of it, maybe. And in general, anyone who ever teaches video games, we can all tell you it starts with 200 people, and it slowly tapers down to 50, which are the people who actually enjoy making games. So I like the idea of using and showing Excel as something that is it's a very essential part of making games. Without it, a lot of games will just not be made. It's a way for us to organize stuff. Obviously, some people don't use it, but it's very common. But it's grid, it's simple, and it fits the idea of using the medium of Excel and putting the message of us as designers through Excel and what we do. The next game I made, I made a few other games on the way that never finished. One of them was Hummus Clicker. Hummus Clicker will happen, which is a game that made fun of Canadians' idea of what hummus is. I won't call up Gabby and the wasabi hummus from... but yeah, I was there was a point where people would just send me bad hummus flavors, and I would scream on Twitter. And there was a few others, but somehow I found myself again having a slight crisis and making a game to deal with it. And that game was called What If? So in March, York University went on strike. If you're Canadian, you know what it is. Basically, York University goes on strike for 3 years, and they have the longest strikes in Canada. This was officially the longest strike in English-speaker higher education. it was 4 months. And that meant like my employment, I didn't get any money for 4 months, and I didn't know what's gonna happen. So I had another source of income, which created an existential crisis. And the existential crisis was basically, what if I chose different? So I decided to make a game about it, but instead of, again, making anything fancy, I made a game in Instagram stories. And the game ran from March 5th to March 10th in my Instagram. And every 12 hours, I published 6 to 7 Instagram stories and a poll which gave the player 2 options of how to continue the game. And a lot of it was like, what if I would have made something different, chose a different choice? And based on the player choice, I had to continue the story. I couldn't plan in advance. So at a certain point, actually, I used like different tenses and stuff like that, but I just had to do it fairly quick. The idea was that Instagram stories are immediate and fleeting. They disappear after 24 hours, so they really fit with the idea of like a dream of what if something will happen, but it's not going to happen, so just let it go. It's also fit with the idea of telling personal story. Instagram is very much used to tell a story. This is my life. Whether it's a true one or not, that's another story. And it helped with also some of the critique around Instagram, especially around women creators, where it's like, oh, the selfie, and it's very self-centered, and there's a lot of selfies in the game. I eventually documented everything. Yeah, it's still there. I documented everything I made in a Twine game. This was actually a really hard decision to make, because I was like feeling like it's against what the game was. The idea of the game is like, that's it, it's done, it's over. But I needed documentation. Again, it's on itch, but it's not actually playable, it's just a story. Okay, don't have a lot of time. So the last game I'm currently working is called I Wanna Be Invisible, and it's probably the closest one to a traditional game. It's a game using the Amazon Alexa. So it has a program called Storyline. It's very similar to Twine. And the game itself deals with my anxieties, again, but mostly about social media, and like every time I get a little bit, like, let's say I get retweeted a lot, I get really anxious. And I really want to do a game. I really want it to be like where the player acts as a machine and Alexa acts like the human, and how we interact with them. Also really want to try and break Alexa and see what happens in like a non-horrifying way. It's probably be horrifying. I am Israeli after all. So what's next? So after that, I have a few other ideas. I just want to continue it until I'm getting. So Tinder Lab, this is my friend Alan's idea. So give them credit when credit is due. But like that would be really cool. Obviously, you have to tell people in advance that you're doing a Tinder Lab. Anyone here know what a Jupyter Notebook is? Yeah, the greatest thing ever made. I love it so much. And I want to make an adventure game in it, see if that's a possibility. Conclusion? Not so much. Just continue. I mean, it's a personal thing. Hopefully 2019 will be slightly better than 2018, and I might be less anxious. But yeah, I do want to continue making those games and see what happens. Maybe I'll get into GDC. And thank you.